I jump in, quick show of hands, if you don't mind. Who here is currently creating long form video, long form audio? Let's call it a podcast. Anybody doing a podcast right now? Quick show of hands. All right, we got a couple people. Young lady, if you don't mind me picking on you. What's your business? Just curious.
I'm a career coach.
Okay.
So I have a co-host in our podcast is about helping business owners scale.
Awesome.
their business.
What's it called?
It's called Scale Up Strategies to Business Growth. Coaches, speakers.
Awesome. Cool. Anybody that has been thinking seriously about a podcast? Quick show of hands there. All right, great. We're in good company. Now, this question's for the real brave souls in the room, okay? Anybody that has launched one but stopped for one reason or another? And my hand goes up because that's actually how I got involved in this space. You know, I never set out to get on the business side of podcasting. I was an independent podcaster, had a lot of passion, saw what the medium could do, but was grossly underprepared for what it takes to build traction and find your audience. And as human beings, we like things that reward us. Nobody's listening besides maybe your mom and the one neighbor down the street. It's a little weird. So what I want to get into today is a framework that my whole intention is to sell you on. My intention is not to sell you on a podcast, but my intention is to sell you on this framework so that as the presenter said up on stage, we can save the world from another terrible podcast, right? In an era where everybody's online, thinking that they're a correspondent, the consumer is really at their wit's end because there's so much noise coming at them. And it's really difficult for them to actually decipher what's for them, what can be a value add relative to what they want versus what's just nonsense. And my goal for everybody in this audience, considering you're here, is to help you be seen as a value add. That sound good? Awesome. So what we're going to talk about today, and by the way, feel free to scan that QR code. That'll set you up with some time with my team where we can actually walk you through this and how it would be related for you specifically, is something that we call the ACORE method, okay? As I mentioned up on stage, this is something that we've been using privately to help clients reach well over 1 million people in as little as 180 days, without the ads, without having to do review swaps, without having to try to hire some high-ticket kosher consultant that never really gets you your money's worth. And where I want to really start is with this glaring stat, okay? 95% of people will not make it past 7 episodes. And my question is like, well, why? Like, you actually think about that, like, why won't 95% make it? And what I can tell you is that it's not because there's a shortage of listeners. All right. Today, I think the recent stats that I saw say that there's something like 90 million Americans every single week listening to about 6 hours of podcast content. That's now more popular than Netflix. There's only 67 million people that have active Netflix accounts. I mean, it's basically a third of the US population, right? So I think we can all agree that there's no shortage of people that want the content. Equipment, you know, last I heard, there were a lot of supply chain issues in other industries, but last I checked on Amazon, it's easier than ever to get a camera, a mic, lights, all that good stuff. So it can't be that, right? Last but not least, you know, this is probably my favorite one. There's probably no shortage of people that want to create the content. I mean, you look at a few people that are doing it, several that are thinking about it. So when you really think about why so many people fail, my hypothesis, just my idea, is that the real issue is that anybody can start, which is a blessing, but also a curse. The fact that anybody can start, I mean, anybody can start, you know, a health and wellness business. Anybody can start a speaking business, plug in whatever your category is, a fashion business, but ask yourself why you somehow managed to continue, yet others kind of quickly find themselves weeded out. So I think the better question we all need to be thinking about that I really want you guys to lean into is, what is it that you need to know that the other 95% didn't, so that if you choose to do this for your company, if you choose to do this for your brand, you don't end up spinning out and possibly causing reputational harm. And we'll kind of go into how that's possible without actually having a plan or a strategy. Everybody with me so far?
Yes.
Perfect. I had this video here. We're having some A/B challenges, so I will make sure that you guys all get this. But as I mentioned, everything that I'm sharing is straight from our group of consultants that are helping people like Quentin, everyday people just like us that are running companies. Quentin happens to be the senior vice president of the Bank of England. So he oversees 300 plus locations. He does mortgages. As we all know, there's been a lot going on with housing and interest rate hikes. And so he came to us just about 7 months ago and said, hey, you know what? I've been in this space 20, 25 years. I was in it in '08, in it now. It's probably time for me to kind of come from behind the curtain and start to share with consumers what's what. So we put together this strategy around the A-Core framework that I'm going to share with each and every one of you. And I'm serious, within 6 months, help them get in front of 1 million people, real people, completely organically. And we've helped him now grow his subscribers to about 10,000 people that are actively listening every single month. The email list is about 8,000 people. These are people that he gets to connect with week in and week out that are on his owned channel. So that's what's possible here for your business. And that's essentially what these results speak to. So with A-Core, the first thing we try to get down pat is who is the content for? If you want to see trends like this with people consuming your content, I mean, one clip we created just last month broke 660,000 views. We link all these clips back to the long form video. You can see here the watch hours in long form video, over 419,000 watch hours in that video that have now left to 2,600 subscribers on his email list. That's possible when you really understand who the content is for. So the first thing I really want to spend some time on today is audience. You know, it's not rocket science. Obviously, we're all creating this content to be engaged and consumed by people. But where most get it wrong is they grab the microphone, the camera, and they just start kind of making content that they think is relevant. And the biggest thing that I need to share with everybody here is if you're going to start creating content seriously, you need to be a steward of your audience, which means you need to spend some time actually understanding who they are. So everybody is familiar with an avatar exercise in here? Perfect. When you think of avatar, what do you think? Name out a couple things. Just whoever. Demographic. What else?
Your ideal client.
Ideal client. One more. Somebody else. What else comes to mind when you hear ideal avatar, for those of you that might be familiar?
Where they hang out.
Where they hang out. Where they hang out, that's a good one. Where they hang out, not just in real life, but also virtually as well, too, right? And so we help you with that, but the piece that I would say the majority of people miss, besides some of those surface level sort of qualifiers or characteristics, is actually understanding the audience's journey. And what I mean by that is, what are all the things that they've tried leading up to them now knocking on your proverbial doorstep where they see your podcast? So when you think about understanding the audience journey, what you want to do to kind of give you a practical takeaway is you want to try to map their life out in 7 core chapters. And when you think about those core chapters, you're thinking about, I would say, pivotal moments in their experience that have caused them to basically think of you as someone that's relevant, that can help them get to their ideal state. So in the case of Quentin, people were getting burned by the banks, you know, the bank run was happening, the collapses, all these different things. We actually helped him map out, all right, well, these people are first-time homeowner buyers that are coming to the Bank of England. What happened right before they came to the bank to sit down with the loan officer? You know, were they qualified or were they not qualified? What are their interests? What are their long-term goals? What's been getting in the way of where they want to go? And so ultimately, when you take the time to sit down and think about an exercise at that level, you get to speak directly to those people. And the thing with podcasting, long-form video, is the more you can curate content that speaks directly to the heart and the minds of these people, the more they feel seen and heard by you. And the important thing about that is they now go, okay, you know what? This is my person. I'm going to show up and continue to plug away. So really taking the time to understand their needs, huge. Last piece, everybody here would like to grow, right? That's why you're thinking about a podcast, reaching 1 million people, that sort of thing.
you need to have a conversion funnel. So we're all in business. I'm sure we all have a thought process around how we market to clients, right? How we convert them, how we nurture them, how we ascend them ultimately through conversion, to ultimately transacting with you. It's the same with your podcast. So we teach something called 4 stages of an audience, all right? The first stage, and I don't have it up here, but I'll send it to you after, is passive listeners, all right? So these are people that are just kind of coming across your content online. They don't know much about you. Typically, it takes somewhere between 7 to 11 touch points with your content, short form or long, for people to kind of become a bit more familiar. Now, once you start really dialing in your passive listeners, you need to have a call to action. You need to tell them something very specific to get them over the gate, is what we call it, all right? And that's what we call a committed listener. That's somebody that says, I'm gonna subscribe. The goal here is subscribers, because as you build your subscribers, you have an opportunity to move these people from a rented platform, which is social media, and at any point in time, Zuckerberg or Musk can come in and change up the algorithm. Actually, just the other day, we met with a business that's doing 94,000 downloads every single month. And because they're doing 94,000 downloads, they're selling advertising. So this gentleman is making somewhere about 15,000 a month on just like 30-second advertising reads. But Apple recently changed the algorithm relative to what they consider a download. And because this guy didn't have a list, because he didn't have a community, well, his advertising revenue went down the toilet. So when you start doing this, not only are you gonna see traction, but your next job, remember I told you, you're a steward now, is to really, think about how you take the audience somewhere off of social where you can really engage with them and drive more value. So that's a lot of what we teach in conversion. I think that's where people go wrong. I wanna pause there to see if there's any questions on that before we continue. Okay. The other piece with conversion is you need to be thinking about your unique positioning, all right? So in order to do a podcast very well, whether you're in business, you're in entertainment, you're in sports, whatever it might be, you need to have one of these 5 qualities, all right? 1, you need to be a conversationalist. So some of the more popular podcasts out there that would be seen as a conversationalist podcast would be like Lewis Howes, School of Greatness, Jay Shetty, On Purpose. These guys are just really good with like sitting down with interesting people and getting fascinating stories out of them. The second is you might consider yourself controversial. Somebody that's controversial that comes to mind, like Dave Ramsey, great example. The guy believes that you basically should be eating, bananas and beans until you pay off all your debt. That's sort of controversial. But you can you chuckle, like that gets your attention, right? So think about that. The third is teacher. One of the great teachers right now that we actually do some work with is Huberman, right? So he's this doctor, he's this professor at Stanford. He teaches us about health and wellness, essentially, from a very deep scientific perspective, right? The fourth is entertainment. Entertainment would be like the Call Her Daddy girls, right? If anybody's familiar with that, right? And then the fifth is what we refer to as kind of like the educator, right? So this is someone that isn't too narrow and deep, but is really good at kind of a variety of different conversations. Think of kind of like a Rogan. You don't really know him for anything specifically, but he can kind of go any number of directions. So think about your unique positioning. Think about why you versus your competition, and see if you can find an impasse or an intersection that allow you to really differentiate yourself in order to get the conversions that you want to see. All right, so that's really the audience side of things. The next piece with the ACORN method is create. So a lot of people jump right to the production side. And the production side is really everything that's happening in between hitting record and hitting end record. What you want to do is you really want to spend more time on pre-production. Remember how I told you that podcasts are now like more popular than Netflix, right? Well, a lot of that is because from a pre-production perspective, there's a lot of time from like a Netflix studio model going into preparing for where these shows are going. So 2 of the things that we really teach is if you can't come up with a compelling title or a compelling thumbnail, which are the first 2 assets that anybody will see to go, hey, that's for me, you probably shouldn't make the episode. So many people just kind of roll out of bed, they hop on Zoom, and they're like, all right, let me see who's on my calendar to do a podcast today. And I'll be honest, the content is just not that good. Maybe back in 2020, when we were all stuck at home, that kind of worked because we were just trying to find ways to stay in front of people. But now you need to be spending anywhere from about 3 to 5 times your recording length. So if you do an hour podcast, maybe 3 to 5 hours preparing to find the right guests, to do some research on topics and themes that maybe haven't been properly covered by your competitors that you know are relevant, right, to the end audience. And then actually pull that together in a kind of like a journalistic or a story type format to deliver something that people are going to want. That's just kind of where the bar is. So you can see what goes into this. You can see that it's not just something you can do flippantly if you do want to create. But there is a process that we teach that you can follow on the pre-production side. The next is production. If you do this, I highly recommend that you invest just a little bit of money in a DSLR camera, a decent mic, and good lighting, all right? Try to stay away from Zoom. There are platforms like Riverside that exist that are great for recording virtually, but everybody does this. And because everybody does this, everybody remains everybody. You see what I'm saying? If you want to kind of break out from the rest, we're teaching our clients how to build low footprint studios at home, in the office. We're partnering up with third-party studios where they can show up, ideally get in contact with the people that they're creating the content with, or maybe have them virtually call in for hybrids. But it really helps us on the production side of things. We've started doing this with one of our guys in San Diego, Mark Devine. He does a show called The Mark Devine Show. He's a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL. So he's had incredible people on, but we noticed that his numbers were sort of plateaued. He's done 10 seasons now. Almost everything before we got involved with him was virtual. Well, we just started getting him in studio with a local organization to him in San Diego, and we've seen about a 70% click-through rate as well as retention rate on his content, simply because it looks more engaging, okay? Again, these things are more popular than Netflix, and I don't know of any Netflix hit series that was done on Riverside or Zoom. So that's the level of commitment that's required. And then post-production, the short and sweet of it here is everything that happens once you're done recording, all right? And a lot of people have this mentality that I've built it, they will now come. And it just doesn't work that way. You know, these podcasts, you put them on Apple, you put them on Spotify, those platforms don't actually have an algorithm built in to show your podcast to new people. They're gonna promote their Spotify exclusive shows. That's typically what they do. So you need to be thinking about a marketing strategy, which I'll talk a little about in some more detail here shortly, to really make sure that you reach your people with the content wherever it is that they might be online to pick up that traction. Everybody with me so far?
Yes.
Perfect. We're rocking and rolling here. So great segue into outreach. We think about this from these 3 buckets, all right? And really what we want you to take away here is if you do podcasting, the best way to grow is by getting people to share your content. And I think that's where it really works well for business owners like you that value networking, right? You all took basically a whole day away from the office, family, other commitments to come and meet people. Imagine if you had something like an audio video channel sharing rich content that people that you hadn't even ever met were sharing with other people, right? And you've got that sort of virtual referral flywheel working for you where people are coming out inbound to you. That's what's possible when you build a strategy for social marketing. So the big thing here is you want to be creating vertical short form content for every platform right now, all right? We live in a very interesting era where you don't have to have a huge following in order to reach hundreds of thousands of people. When Quinton started, he literally had 0, maybe was putting out an occasional post around the holidays, birthdays, that sort of a thing. And now, you know, I'd say his Instagram, I think, is up to about 4,000 people, which is huge for him. His YouTube is approaching 5,000 people. I mean, he's got a really nice thing happening organically here. And that's because we post to every single channel every day. So what we do is we take these podcasts, these long-form video format podcasts, think of them as kind of like the trunk of a tree, and we repurpose the content. Think of that as like the branches or the offshoots for every channel. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn is a big one now for business people, right? Twitter, And basically that gives us anywhere from about 35 to 42 new unique opportunities every single day to reach the ideal audience. And because there's so many people creating content, competing for our audience's attention, your audience's attention, that helps us compress time, right? That helps us compress time on helping them determine whether or not this is something for them or not for them. So that's the social marketing piece. Guesting, a really big opportunity here, but where people get it wrong is they just say, like the guy I had on the slide a couple slides ago, hey bro, like let me get on your podcast. And there's really there's no meat behind the request. And often, if they haven't done what I'm teaching you here today, it falls on deaf ears. Because the kinds of podcasts you want to be on are typically very reputable podcasts where the host has spent a tremendous amount of time building an audience. You're okay, right? And so if you haven't done that, what makes you think that you're someone that's worthwhile them having on their podcast? So you really want to kind of get your house in order, so to speak, and then you want to think about the specific types of audiences that exist relative to what other people have created. Don't just take every old podcast out there. Again, 9 out of 10 of them are not good, and it would just be a waste of your time. Beyond that, make sure that you actually have a call to action when you go on these podcasts, meaning you've got a funnel that's already been created to point people to. The whole goal here is to basically borrow somebody's audience to then convert them onto your list and show to them why they've made a good choice consuming your content. So that's the big thing on the guesting piece. On the networking, we teach people, and we have this whole KPI tracker we use to basically find virtual communities that they can engage with. So think Reddit groups, think Facebook, think Discord, just to name a few. Your ideal audience is already spending a good amount of time on communities online. And so for you to not come off the pedestal and meet them where they are and provide some valuable insight is a really big missed opportunity. So this is a great way to get some organic growth back to the podcast to where people are ultimately sharing about what you're doing. And then we move into the results. So results, ultimately everybody here knows that you can't make meaningful progress towards what you're not measuring. And for the longest time in our industry, what was really hard was that we didn't have really good quality data from podcasts. You maybe had downloads, you maybe had some information around where listeners were, if that was even that accurate, and not really much more in between. Now, it's significantly improved. There's tools like Social Host, there's tools like Co-Host that really give us some great data. And so you want to make sure that you spend some time optimizing for results that tell you what your engagement is doing. All right, the biggest thing that you're doing in the early days is to engage. And what that looks like is obviously likes, comments, shares are fantastic, but we teach our clients to actually put together an offer where you can sit down with the ideal listener. And what this looks like for one of our clients is once a month, we'll do a virtual hangout. He'll go live with one of the guests. They'll point them back to a little community space that we use on a platform called Movement. And this is an opportunity to actually sit down with your ideal listeners to hear why they're coming to you. What do they want? What are they liking? What would they like to see done differently? I mean, imagine if you could talk to 10 of your ideal clients and get real-time feedback from the market. How would that help you? Probably tremendously. So that's where the analytics piece comes from. Beyond that, you want to make sure that you've got a clean reporting dashboard that really harvests all this data. So a lot of podcasters that we see, they're kind of just making decisions flippantly. Like I'm not growing, I'll just go off over here and kind of change my branding. Or I'll add in another episode. And these things are really more subjective versus objective. So with a clean reporting tool like we teach, you've got data that can help you make a more objective decision. And from there, once you understand what the data is saying, you can now adjust. I think where people really burn out, those that actually have kind of decided that hand over fist, I'm gonna make it to 50 episodes or 100, where they end up burning out is that they actually don't understand what's either helping or hurting them. With our process, when you understand the right KPIs, what they actually mean, you can now say, all right, this is where I need to kind of make a pivot relative to the length of my episodes. You know, we saw this with one of our other clients, Lateris. He had this episode that wasn't really getting a ton of engagement. And we said, you know what, we actually need to pull that and have you focus on the longer format episode with the really credible guests, because that's what people actually want. And go figure, over the next 30 days, we saw the engagement spike. So reporting, like anything else, your finances, your weight, gonna really be a great value there for you guys. And once you have those pieces in order, you understand the audience that you're creating for, right? You've got a streamlined process to give them content that they actually want. You're marketing it effectively from an organic perspective, and you're tracking all the results. It's just time to expand. That's it. And so at this stage, our clients are seeing somewhere around 10,000 downloads on average per episode. They're getting tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of views on their videos. Their email lists are growing. We typically see about a 2 to 5% conversion rate from call to action to the email list. We now have a pretty good understanding of who our content is actually resonating with. And from there, that's a great time to go leverage a paid ad strategy, which is what we're doing with Mark right now. People typically want to jump into paid ads, and there's nothing wrong with paid ads, but if you don't know who you're talking to, it becomes quite difficult to really ensure that there's an ROI there for you. So that's a good time for paid ads. That's a really good time to actually increase production value. And what I mean by that is more episodes, different formats of episodes, building out a community. Mark right now is launching a paid community for about $20 a month, where people get exclusive content and they can go further with him, because we have that built-in list that has basically told us what they want us to create for them. So that's the real big key there. And then you just leverage your momentum. At this kind of stage in the game, you have an opportunity now to level up in terms of your networking. You know, so you can get featured on the bigger name shows. You can get better guests on that have now seen what you've been able to do. And so it all comes down to just these 5 steps. Like I said earlier, the goal here is not to sell you on a podcast, but if you're thinking about long-form content, audio and video, which I think we all should be, is to sell you on this framework. Because going through this, our hope is that, as simple as it is, even though it takes some upfront work, when you do it, we actually all leave the world in a bit of a better place, because we're giving people what they actually want. So the journey here, again, get focused on the